in the heart of the lush, green jungle, where the trees reached high into the sky and the sunlight danced through the leaves in golden beams, Bear was having one of the most unusual mornings of his life. He had woken up to the soft chirping of birds, the buzzing of bees, and the distant roar of a waterfall cascading over the rocks. Normally, Bear enjoyed a quiet morning, sitting by his favorite tree with a honeycomb breakfast. But today was different. Today, a mysterious, glistening bubble had appeared in the middle of his clearing. It wasn't just any bubble. It shimmered in rainbow colors, floating gently in the warm breeze as if it were alive. Bear scratched his furry head, his round ears twitching, and stared at the bubble with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He poked it lightly with his paw, and to his amazement, the bubble bounced off his paw like a soft trampoline, giggling a little as it bobbed away. "Well, that's new," Bear muttered, his deep voice rumbling through the jungle. Just as he reached out to grab it again, the bubble floated higher, brushing against a branch and splitting into 3 smaller bubbles that zoomed in different directions, each carrying a tiny jingling sound like wind chimes. Bear's eyes widened. He had never seen anything like this in his entire life. And then, as if sensing that Bear was not alone in this curious adventure, a familiar figure appeared over the hill. Yeti, his best friend. Yeti was a gentle giant, covered in white fur that glowed softly in the morning sun. His eyes twinkled with mischief and excitement as he lumbered toward Bear. "Bear, what are you staring at?" Yeti called, his voice a deep, melodic rumble that could shake leaves from the trees. Bear pointed at the floating, shimmering bubbles. "Look, they just appeared out of nowhere, and they seem alive," he stammered. Yeti's eyes widened, and a huge grin spread across his face, revealing a row of perfectly even teeth. "Bubbles, you say? Oh, this is going to be fun," Yeti exclaimed. He immediately began bouncing around, trying to catch one with his enormous hands. But every time he got close, the bubbles zipped away, giggling and twisting in the air. The jungle soon echoed with their laughter and shouts as Bear and Yeti chased the playful bubbles across the clearing, leaping over roots, ducking under vines, and occasionally bumping into each other in their excitement. Birds squawked in alarm, monkeys squealed in delight from the treetops, and even a shy deer peered from behind bushes, curious about the commotion. Bear lunged forward, and his paw grazed a bubble, causing it to expand dramatically into a giant, wobbling orb. "Whoa!" he yelled, stumbling backward as the giant bubble carried him a few feet off the ground. Yeti laughed so hard that he almost fell over, clutching his stomach. "Bear, you're inside it!" he shouted between chuckles. The bubble bounced along the ground like a soft, bouncy ball, with Bear tumbling and rolling inside, squeaking and laughing uncontrollably. He tried to push against the walls, but every time he did, the bubble stretched, twisted, and floated higher, until Bear was rolling across the jungle, bouncing over fallen logs, hopping over small streams, and even startling a few curious snakes along the way. Meanwhile, Yeti was chasing after him, occasionally trying to pop the bubble with gentle pokes, but the bubble seemed smarter than both of them combined. They zigzagged to the jungle, looping around trees and swirling in circles, as if the jungle itself was joining in the playful chaos. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting sparkling lights on the bubbles, turning them into magical orbs that reflected the greenery, the flowers, and even Bear's surprised face. Finally, the largest bubble floated up to a branch and popped, sending Bear tumbling safely onto a soft bed of moss. He lay there for a moment, dazed but unharmed, while Yeti helped him up, laughing and brushing leaves off his friend's fur. "That was amazing," Bear said, still catching his breath. "Amazing and terrifying." Yeti replied with a grin. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of their big bubble trouble, a magical adventure that would twist, twirl, and turn their jungle world upside down in ways they could never imagine. After the giant bubble adventure, Bear and Yeti thought they had seen everything that morning, but the jungle had other plans. As they shook off the moss and leaves in their fur, more bubbles began to appear, this time in clusters, floating together like a shimmering rainbow cloud. Each bubble was unique. Some glimmered pink, others sparkled blue, and a few even had tiny glittering stars inside. The jungle was alive with the sound of soft giggles and gentle pops as the bubbles bounced against leaves, flowers, and vines. Bear's eyes widened in both amazement and concern. Yeti, how many of these are there? He asked, scanning the jungle floor that now seemed dotted with hundreds of colorful, bouncing orbs. Yeti scratched his furry chin thoughtfully, his wide, white eyebrows twitching. Too many to count, my friend. And I have a feeling they're just getting started, he replied, a mischievous glint in his deep blue eyes. Bear sneezed, sent his ears flopping in every direction, and Yeti laughed until tears formed at the corners of his eyes. Careful, Bear. That's magic mist, I think. Yeti warned, but it was too late. Bear's fur began to tingle, and suddenly he felt lighter than air. Before he knew it, he was hovering a few inches above the ground, bouncing on invisible springs. Yeti jumped in shock, but quickly realized it was a bubble magic causing the effect. This is amazing. You're floating. Yeti shouted, clapping his hands. Bear wobbled midair, spinning in circles, and tried to grab a nearby vine to steady himself. The vine, however, was slippery, and instead of holding him, it swung him like a pendulum, launching him straight toward a group of laughing monkeys. The monkeys squealed, scattering in every direction as Bear bounced off the jungle floor, twirling and flipping in ways even acrobats would envy. Yeti ran after him, tried to catch both Bear and the mischievous bubbles, but the jungle had its own ideas. Birds swooped down, playfully pecking at the floating bubbles, which made them bounce unpredictably. Tiny frogs leaped from lily pads into the air, accidentally colliding with bubbles and creating hilarious chains of bounces. The sound of laughter, squeaks, and gentle pops echoed throughout the jungle, like a symphony of chaos. Finally, Bear landed on a soft patch of moss, panting and laughing. Okay, I think I've had enough floating for one day, he said, trying to regain his composure. Yeti, however, was already mid-chase after a particularly tricky cluster of bubbles that had formed a shape resembling a giant rainbow snake. He bounced, twirled, and ducked as he tried to swat them, only for the bubbles to split and swirl around him, creating a dizzying spectacle. The jungle animals watched with fascination, and even the usually grumpy crocodile by the river raised its eyebrows in surprise. Suddenly, a bubble larger than any they had seen before floated down from the treetops, shimmering gold and silver with sparkling patterns that seemed to shift like liquid light. Bear and Yeti stopped in their tracks, staring at it in awe. The bubble was enormous, big enough to hold a full-grown bear comfortably, and yet it hovered gracefully above the jungle floor as if waiting for them. Bear stepped closer, poking it gently. To his astonishment, the bubble expanded slightly, then formed an entrance, a small, glowing doorway in its side. Yeti gasped. Bear, do you think we can go inside? He whispered. Bear's round eyes sparkled with curiosity and excitement. Only one way to find out, he said, stepping inside. The interior of the bubble was unlike anything either of them had ever seen. It was a soft, glowing space that seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with floating platforms, sparkling streams of light, and bouncing orbs that looked like tiny planets. As Bear and Yeti explored, the bubbles around them swirled and danced in response to their movements, almost as if the jungle itself was alive within this magical bubble world. They bounced from platform to platform, giggling uncontrollably as they navigated this strange, enchanting realm. Birds flew alongside them, butterflies glimmered in the air, and even a few jungle monkeys cautiously joined in, floating on tiny bubbles of their own. Time seemed to slow as Bear and Yeti tumbled, floated, and twisted to the sparkling wonderland, and they realized that the jungle was no longer just a place of trees and rivers. It was now a magical playground where anything could happen. And while they were having the time of their lives, neither of them noticed that the bubbles were starting to move together, forming a gigantic, swirling cyclone of color and light, promising even bigger adventures and bigger bubble trouble just around the corner.